Hark now, mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm, so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through veritable seas to boxes flow. Dar die. Hoist the sail.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Partnership. I am incredibly excited to have Joe Duronio with me today. Joe and I met up a couple weeks ago in San Francisco while he was visiting over from Singapore, and we started talking about GSI partnerships. And I was like, I don't think anybody I talked to ever understood this topic so well as Joe. Joe worked at AIG first as a customer of GSIs, and then worked at Snowflake, and then now also at Databricks, working closely with GSI partners. So I'm incredibly excited for this conversation. Thanks for joining us, Joe.
No, thank you so much for having me, Franz. Really appreciate it. First, I wanted to say, really enjoyed your book. That's one of the things that we met.
Appreciate it.
Really cool to meet up with you in San Francisco, and it's great to connect with you here on your podcast and your show here. I'll just make a quick disclaimer. The views and opinions that I have today are my own, not that of any of the companies that I've been affiliated with over the years. But it's great to be on this show and to engage with you. And it's cool what you're doing to build a community of people who are interested in this sort of new profession, I would say, this sort of growing practice of partnerships. And I'm happy to bring my experience working with very large consulting firms, global systems integrators. And I've done that in the last several years in Asia. So if there's a spin on APJ with Asia Pacific and Japan, I'm happy to dive into that as well.
Yeah, and especially helping American companies or international companies expand inside of Asia, which I think is also a really interesting twist. A while ago, we had Ty Radigan on from Deal, and he was explaining like how to expand globally, and specifically like Japan and Korea are like very reseller heavy markets as well. And so I think there's something interesting there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing business in Asia for almost 15 years, off and on. And I've lived in Singapore for the last 5, where I've had roles that have covered all of Asia Pacific and Japan. I started my career as a lawyer. So I was at AIG, where I practiced securities and insurance law for almost 6 years. And then I did an MBA and went into strategy and transformation. And that's where I did big projects. And I was, as you mentioned, sort of hiring the Deloittes and Accentures of the world to do sizable projects. Moved out to Singapore 5 years ago, worked at a startup, then worked for 2 of the fastest growing, US tech companies that are expanding in Asia.
That's a great, you got the whole 360 view.
Yeah.
Before we dive in, I want to give a quick shout out to Jonathan, who joined us in the chat. Jonathan, great to see you representing the SF Bay Area. Jonathan and I recently had dinner as well as part of Pavilion, which is a great community as well for operators. And excited to see you here today. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. Like I have a couple questions prepared for Joe, but then if you have any that you want to hear about, like let us know and we can discuss them as well. With that being said, like I want to start with GSIs, understanding GSIs specifically from like the customer lens. Like you work with GSIs before as like a customer. How is that different from working with like a standard consultancy, for example, like a small boutique shop somewhere in Singapore?
Yeah. So there's a couple of reasons why you would want to hire a GSI, and typically you're already working for a very large organization. The project that you have is going to have some level of complexity. Or there will be some demand for things to be done right. And in some cases, you're buying the brand of the company that you're working with, like a Deloitte or an Accenture. In some cases, you're buying the brand of Deloitte because you need them to solve a problem or prove to some third party, some regulator, that you're doing the right thing. And so having a brand like that is critical in some of those cases. But most of the time, it goes to their skill set, their experience, and their scale, right? So if you have a multinational problem, you're going to want to have a large company that has the ability to deliver in multiple jurisdictions around the world, or that can put delivery services in a lower cost center like India or the Philippines. So those are some of the reasons why you'd want to deal with a firm that's so much larger than what we call an RSI, a regional systems integrator, or maybe that could be a
Mm.
company that is only 100 or 200 people, or even smaller, a shop of 5 to 10 people. And those could have their niche solutions where they can do this particular thing very well. They understand your technology very well, or they're a trusted advisor of certain senior executives of that company, of the company you're in. So there's reasons to use that smaller team. The smaller team might be cheaper in some ways, and in some cases, the program may be so complex they use a combination of partners. Right? You could have a Deloitte doing some strategy work here, TCS doing some implementation, and then in Thailand, you use this local company that helps to deliver in that particular jurisdiction. And so you can have
Yeah.
programs so complex that you have multiple different partner types on the same project.
Wow, that's crazy. We have a comment in the chat. I want to quickly give a shout out to Marianne, who joined us from Sydney, Australia. This APAC session is working. Marianne, I'm so sorry that normally we always like have something on Pacific time or on European time. So I'm glad that we finally get to have a live session as well, where you can join.
Welcome.
And then for an example, like Jonathan just shared that he hired Deloitte to carve out Litmus from SAP. Is that the kind of projects that you were working on as well, where like you had a tool stack, for example, and you needed to like disintegrate the tool stack or integrate the tool as well?
So absolutely, and SAP is one where all of the major GSIs have large SAP practices. So there'll be hundreds, maybe in some cases thousands of people who are dedicated to working on SAP and doing things like whether it's carving out Litmus or are doing other types of migrations, right? And so that's one of the things where I think these GSIs come in to big projects is doing migrations or putting up a layer on top of older technology, right? So if you have these old mainframes and databases that update via batch processes once a night or once a week or once a quarter, but you need to have real-time data or you need to be able to integrate with modern APIs, you'll put a layer above those old systems. And those types of interactions between older technologies and newer modern technologies are things that the GSIs do routinely for very large organizations, particularly banks and insurance companies like the one that I worked at. In career.
As somebody who spent his entire career in startups, it still fascinates me just how many companies still operate on mainframes and like all this old technology, right? Because it's so hard to rip and replace, right?
So there's a reason for that as well, is that sometimes those pieces of technology work, right? And if you're in a financial services business and you've written a 30-year mortgage, right? Then it shouldn't be so unexpected that some of those simple things like accepting money, printing out a statement, mailing that statement, for over 30 years would still be on systems that were built 30 years ago. In AIG, occasionally we would have, we would buy other companies, other old insurance companies that we would have on our books. And some of the systems, it was too costly to go in and modernize. And you would do this analysis as to whether we should do the project or not. And oftentimes the analysis says, don't touch this machine, because any effort you put into it actually hurts the profitability of the business that you purchased. So there's those considerations as well.
Don't fix it if it ain't broken.
Yeah.
And I think you also mentioned a really interesting point around like people buying the brand, right? So here we have like Jonathan also chiming in that like SAP, like they had GSIs as like coveted partners, and same with Salesforce. Like you might have, these partners like GSIs just available for your top customers as well, to show like we are working with Deloitte or we are working with EY. It gives you a certain credibility. Like I know when we did audits, we would work like with an EY or something like that, also just to show like, we are respectable.
Without a doubt. I mean, when I was in a startup, that was one of the things we did to help build our brand, was to affiliate with these larger GSIs, and you sort of work your way up the chain, project by project. But to be able to put, Cognizant on your website that you've done deals with them, or EY, that you're on a platform that they've built for a solution in a particular vertical, that's incredibly powerful for your brand. And it goes to say that those experts there that are doing something in mining or in retail, and they've built a solution that they're taking out to multiple partners, and your technology is part of that. That definitely goes to build your own brand, and it says something about the functionality of the technology that you're working with.
100%. And you also never get fired for hiring Deloitte. or some of these big GSIs. It's like you like if you hire a regional shop, then you might put your reputation on the line. Versus like if Deloitte messes up, then you're like, well, it was Deloitte. Like, what could I have
That's true.
done?
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, people do that to sort of pass the buck or effectively buy insurance on a project, right?
Yeah,
and
100%.
on their career, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to have things needed to get done very quickly, and to have a large GSI when I was a customer be able to put people against it and come through and really help me in my career in many ways.
Yeah, that's awesome. Before we go on, I want to give a quick shout out to Andrew, who's joining us from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. I think that's a first for the show to have a live viewer from Vietnam, so I really appreciate that. I really enjoyed this APAC session. I feel like we're going to do more of them.
Sure.
Let's dive into partnerships. Like, I think we understand like kind of roughly like what the customer would want now. Like, what is the dynamic between a GSI and a startup? Like, how does a GSI approach a relationship with a vendor like a Databricks or a Snowflake or something like that? What makes them choose like one over the other?
So I mean, that's good. I mean, ideally they're choosing because the technology, right? So when you're a customer, you're buying Deloitte's or Accenture's or any GSI's services, and you look at them as a trusted advisor, right? And you want them to have a level of independence. And so you want them to evaluate the technology, the problem that you have, and to put together an architecture or framework that drives the business value of the solution that they're putting together. So you hope that has an unbiased view, and that they pick the right technology to hit the most functionality. And that could involve several factors. It could involve which is pricing, which is the most efficient and how fast it works, what fits in with the other tools that you're using, whether there's connectors to, and SAP has been mentioned several times already by the audience, whether it connects to SAP. Those will be some of the factors that the GSI should be evaluating. But the reality is that on the other side of it, as you're a startup or even an established player, relationships come into play, and building the relationship with the GSI such that they know that not only is the technology good, but this team is going to deliver. If I pick up the phone, they're going to answer my questions. They're going to go to market with us. They're going to show up in the RFP, the request for a proposal. There will be several stages of that. Much of it's on paper, some of it's interviews, but they know and trust that this person is going to show up with me and help me to sell this to that client. And so I'll go with this technology, even though it may cost a little bit more, but I know that this team is going to deliver. And that's something where I think, the partnership team helps to provide value and connectivity between those two, different firms, right?
Yeah.
The technology company sells software as a service, right? It's a license. They write the program once, they sell it many, many times. It's an incredibly scalable business, right? The GSI sells time. It sells man hours. Right. And so they have a very different business model between the two. And oftentimes I think people can get lost in thinking about which drives these two different businesses. Yeah. I hope that's helpful.
Got it. Yeah. I think there are a couple of interesting things in there. It's like, I think one, which I catch here as well, is that it sounds like the GSI is buying a brand as well. Like they want to buy something which works, guaranteed. Right. And so like probably one of the takeaways is like in the basic dynamics with a GSI partnership, like don't be a seed stage startup with no proven, or like with 10 customers. Like that's probably not going to work out. Is that fair?
So it's fair, but I was in that position once, and it's possible, right? And I will say that you have to do that.
How did it happen?
You have to have a niche, right? You have to have something that you can do and come and provide value. And typically, if you're going to work with a large company and you're a very small company, you're probably going to have to bring them the client as well, right?
Yeah.
That you've already sold this piece of software. That company that you've sold to, the client, needs somebody to go install this or connect it and do those things. And then you bring that client to EY or to Deloitte. And then they're like, whoa, okay, these people are serious. I want to do this again, right? I'll get some of my guys trained on that software. Right? And that's where you start.
Yeah.
And that's the big logo on your website when you're a very small company, right?
Yeah.
You have to set the whole deal. That's what, good looks like.
But
it's very cool. And you're right. At this stage, they want to bring a company to the table to the client that they have some fidelity and that's been proven and tested in the market.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point. And we had it like recently. We talked with Josh Green from AWS as well. And like oftentimes, what I mentioned this in the book as well, and it's just hear it over and over, is that the expectation often is like, hey, I have the technology and then you bring the customer or something like that. Versus like with these large companies and partners, in reality, you have to bring the technology and you have to co-market, right? Like you have to build the integration and you have to co-market it. You have to do everything in order to show them that there's value before they will ever start investing in you. Like you can't go to Deloitte and go like, I have this great solution. Do you have customers who need it? Like that's probably not going to fly.
Yeah,
they want to have those proof points.
That's probably one of the worst things you could say straight out the bat is, can you tell me who your top customers are? Right.
Yeah.
Now everybody wants to know that. And your sales leader at your company wants, these big GSIs to walk you into their diamond, double black diamond marquee clients. Right.
Yeah.
If you start off like that, you're dead in the water. No one's going to pay attention to you. If you bring value to the table and you do that, somewhat humbly, they'll come back to you and they'll say, I want to do that again. And in fact, I've got a list of these clients that have the same problem that we solved, right? For that client. Yeah. And that's how you try to build, a bit of scale and a bit of a go-to-market momentum. And again, when you're starting out, it's very much deal by deal.
Yeah, 100%. We have a couple of questions from the audience, so I want to dive into those. I also want to give Peter a quick shout out, who's joining us from Los Angeles. Great to see you, Peter. Before we go in there, though, I want to cover what the end game looks like. Like, what does good look like? What does success look like when you partner with a GSI?
Yeah. So what I would say that success is that they have built a practice around you. And a great example of that is at Accenture. They have an entire division called the Accenture Amazon Business Group. Right. And that's thousands of people. There's a very senior executive who's the head of that group globally, and probably one in each sub-region, that has thousands of people that are trained, certified, that have delivered projects, and can do so at scale. And once you have a practice group that is dedicated to you and they're gold on sales, the momentum is taking it's just gone. Like you're going, right. You're managing a team, right? You're no longer building. You're trying to maintain and optimize a machine that is scaling on its own. That's incredible. And big marquee companies that have that are Amazon, Salesforce, SAP. These types of really large pieces of technology, they basically become almost, and it's literally, they call it channel sales. The GSIs become the sales channel by which these businesses are scaled. And that's the goal. And when you're at a startup, the goal is to get one person who knows your stuff, a partner at one of these major companies, GSIs. And then when you're in that scaling phase, you just want to get a small team, one guy in each sub-region, a person in Australia, a person in Japan, 5 or 10 people pulled together. They're talking about the deals that they've done and how it worked and what the best practices are. And that's where you start to build and scale. And then you have people that are fractionally tied to your business. It's on the edge of their desk. It moves to being half their time. Somebody gets excited and says, this piece of technology is going to look like the Amazon Business Group in 5 years or 10 years. And it's going to have thousands of people. And I'm not in a position to go lead that Amazon practice today. But if I start this now, in 5 years or 10 years, I'll run a major practice group of a large GSI. And that gets it's exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine, like, especially if you're working in a GSI, it's exciting because you could be the leader of that practice group, right? If you're the person who brings in, that new technology, which is going to make them so much money, right?
It's actually a career move for a lot of mid-level partners, people who are, the other thing that gets exciting is when, you do a deal with somebody and helps them to make a partner. Man, that person is going to trust you and want to work with you and want to lead that business and lead that practice with you. That gets that's a very cool feeling as well. Yeah,
that's awesome. What does that look like at scale? Like, let's say like you're an SAP, right? And maybe you haven't seen this firsthand, but it would be interesting to just understand, like, if you're an SAP and you're like, Accenture has the Accenture SAP practice, let's say.
Yeah.
Like, how do you even manage that as an SAP? Like, how closely related are you? Are you like literally sitting in the same office at some point? Or do you have like still only CEO level of relationships, or do you have like a whole team which enables the partner?
All of that, right? So you will definitely have an SAP person, or I shouldn't, whatever big piece of technology it is, right?
Yeah.
They will have somebody eventually, when you get a practice group dedicated to you, you will have somebody dedicated to that partner, a partner manager, who oftentimes sits inside the the Accenture or the Deloitte office, whatever one they're dedicated to. And if you get to the point where you have a scale where you have dedicated people working on a particular GSI, they open up the curtains and they invite you into the annual account planning sessions that they have. So they have some massive Japanese bank. They make $100 million a year on services doing a variety of things, SAP, Salesforce, all these different tools that they have that this big GSI knows about, and they look about 12 to 18 months in the future and they make an account plan. What are that company's problems? What new pieces of technology can we bring to help solve those problems? And if you get to be in that room when they're doing that account plan, then you can put in and say, this is where we fit. You're no longer competing on a bid, an open bid, where the client says to the market, hey, 10 GSIs, tell me what I should do about this problem, this migration, this old piece of technology that I have. Now you're planning actively and ahead of the curve for what that major client's problems are, and you're inserted there. So it's not going to go to market. It's going to be something that's whispered to the CEO of that client. So that's one thing. That dedication. You mentioned the CEO levels when 20% of your sales are coming out of one major company that has a practice group for you. Of course, the CEOs meet. They jump on stage together, the annual summit. They do quarterly business reviews, which is very common. It's a term that I don't like because it has such a it sounds like it's reviewing the history. It is. I mean, it's quarterly business review. And I think must be more like strategy, regular meetings about what we're going to do in the future as opposed to reviewing the past. But that's the term of art that is used constantly, is the quarterly business review. So you have to have those connects at the executive level. You have to have somebody dedicated to that practice group. And then, and sales can really take off, and the number of people getting certified on your technology can increase substantially.
Yeah. That's awesome. You just mentioned something which caught my attention, which was about being in the room. Do you mean like being physically in the room where the planning happens and you sit down together, or do you mean having a champion who's like there? Because I think that's also a balance. Like the best partnerships people, sometimes they like get into rooms and get into meetings and get to be part of sessions where like, how do you do that? Like, how do you even get into that session? Like, how are you allowed to like look under the kimono? Just keeping it in an APAC theme.
So it starts with having the champion in the room. It starts with you not being in the room, right? And then you get somebody who's done several deals on your piece of technology. And then he says, what we really need is to really focus in on this client. We need to bring Joe into the room, right? For the planning session. And that's rare. It is rare. It doesn't happen all the time. But you get to the size and scale and trust, and they've seen you work. And then one of the main things about getting to that room is to be dedicated. If you manage 10 GSIs, right? It's very hard to get into that room because they don't want you to hear stuff and then take it to another one. But if they know you're gold and dedicated to their business, right? That means that when the company puts something into the market and says, I want to hear from Deloitte, Accenture, and EY, and you're the guy that's gold on Accenture, they know you're going to fight internally at the company that you're in, the startup that you're in, and say, we really need to back Accenture. My goals are tied to Accenture's success. And somebody else that's not as good as me has the other GSI, and they fight internally about how much they can help and support that company on that bid. So it's about it's an exercise in building trust, and it does take a long time.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I guess like that's one of the key features of these kind of alliances as well, or partnerships, that they will probably take a very long time to build. And then what I'm hearing as well is like, if you run 10 GSIs as one partner manager, you're probably not doing your job very well. Like there's no way you can do this very, very well because of just the sheer scale, right? So how do you pick? Like how do you know if it's an Accenture or a Deloitte, right? Like what's the difference?
Yeah. So I always take a sort of like, I think about this like, and I think you have some of these elements in your books and the frameworks of how you decide, which I would refer everybody to. I often think of portfolio theory, right? So I studied finance at business school, and they teach you, a portfolio theory. And there's one that I really like that's called the barbell, right? So you have, if you normally think about risk, you invest in the S&P 500. Most of your risk is like in the middle of the market, right? And you got tail end that you're not really paying attention. I want to go for, instead of that, I can get the same risk exposure by having a bunch of money in treasuries and then a bunch of money in crazy options, right?
Yeah.
And so you focus most of your effort on one or two outstanding big key partners. And then you add in my opinion, one or two kind of flyers that, you don't know what's going to happen there. This could take off and it could be amazing. And maybe that's because you've got a key relationship with one senior executive at that partner, and you think he can be your champion, even though there's no pipeline, they don't have anybody certified, but you think this guy could be the one that can help you get there. That's kind of the risk you might want to take, if he's senior and has the clout. But mostly you look at the pipeline is critical, the number of certified partner practitioners that they have on your technology. And once somebody starts to get, really high in those types of things, are producing more funding for you and money for you, and they're building out and investing in you, that's where your focus goes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. You let the market decide, like, or customers, right? Like wherever you see all of a sudden more certifications, more customers pool around one, that's probably where it's at. Yeah.
You have to watch that, but you also have to, drive for the ones that you want, right?
That's true.
Yeah. And oftentimes there's sort of a hierarchy, right? Your premier partners are going to be the ones that you're chasing, and then smaller partners or the less premier, maybe the ones that see you as the hot thing to sell, and they come after you, and you have to be careful about your time. So it feels really uncomfortable to sort of stiff arm a major firm because you don't have the time. And then you're trying to get the time of senior executives at another one, right? So it's very much that dynamic, right? Where you fit in that stack.
Yeah. Portfolio prioritization is like so important. And I got it wrong a couple of times early in my career, just because initially it was like everybody. And then you're like, well, I can't do that. And so then you focus very narrowly, and you realize the answer is actually to have like just a healthy mix of like long-term and short-term opportunities, right? Or crazy risk and like safe bets.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. We have 2 questions from the audience. And so I want to dive into them now as well. So one is, how do you start to connect with the GSI representative? Like, let's say you want to start building these relationships. Like, which person do you begin with?
Yeah, I mean, if you're starting from scratch, anybody that will pick up the phone and talk to you from that company, right? It's best if you go, and if you're trying to, meet up with somebody for a coffee, look, certainly you want to get to somebody who's at the partner level, right? Or higher, managing director, partner, somebody who has the authority to say, this is where we want to go and this is who we want to work with. Building those connections and networking is critical. That's a lot of my job, is just getting to know the people and getting somebody to map out who's who in that large company. And oftentimes these companies are so big that they don't even know each other. So it's not like you will want them to have an alliance manager, and there may be an alliance manager at that company, but they're already usually focused on 2 or 3 pieces of technology that they're dedicated to. So you want to get that company to create an alliance manager for you. And it tends to be somebody who's in that sort of mid-career that's had a couple of wins with you. So the first step is very difficult, to be quite honest. You may want to go through a client that you have. That's probably the best way to get an introduction that's cold, is to have sold to a customer and say to the customer, hey, what's the key partner that you work with? And they say, oh, I work with Accenture. Would you mind, let's have a discussion about how they might be able to help us implement this. And then whoever you can get your hands on in that organization. And you have to be like, constantly trying to push and meet as many people in that organization as you can.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, 100%. I think it's kind of similar then to like other types of partnerships as well, where, cold outbound, it gets a bad rep. It's probably not the right move, but it still makes sense to go and network and try to just meet people and see what you can do. But then, going for your customers or partners is probably a safer route as well. Like customers who already work with somebody and just go, who do you work with? Look how great we're doing together, and so forth. But then I guess also for partners, right? Like this is another one, just thinking back at the session we did with Ty Radigan, where he said like at Amplitude, they actually had another partner called Braze, which was a software they often sold together. And so then they went to Braze and were like, who do you use for implementation in Korea? Or who's your partner in Japan? And then Braze was like, oh, we have actually here a couple of them. And then they would go to them and say like, hey, now you can sell these 2 tools together. You can just increase your, amount of revenue for a customer by like selling more solutions, more services around them, and so forth.
Absolutely. And I would say that kind of introduction is even more critical in Asia Pacific, where I think relationships drive a lot more of the business. And building trust and long-term relationships is much more, I think, critical there. Whereas in the United States, I think things are more mature. People look at technology and they buy quickly. They make decisions faster. They're not too concerned about these individuals and, doing long lunches and karaoke sessions all through the evening to build up trust. It's a different market.
Yeah, 100%. We're hitting up on time, but I want to make sure that we get this question in from Jonathan.
Sure.
It's quite a long one, so it's going to cover most of the screen. So I'm just going to show it real quick. But the question is really like, how do you get GSIs? I'm going to recite it here without it
Yeah.
blocking our faces. But how do you get GSIs to help push your solution into new countries when there are not that many add-on services? Because I guess to your point, like their model is to be a service, provider, and you want to provide services around your solution. But if your solution is like an AI tool which doesn't need a lot of implementation, how do you thread that needle?
So I've hit that problem a few times where your technology. One of the things that gets a GSI excited is that your technology is very complex. It requires a lot of man hours to install or to complete a migration or to connect. And if you have
the
a
more
solution,
difficult, the better.
yeah, that exactly in some ways, right? But if you have something that accelerates one of those processes, you could be taking away from their man hours, right? But you have to make the argument that you wouldn't want to, you'd want to deliver value faster to your client, and you're in a competitive space, right, between you and the other GSI. And if you use this technology that doesn't have these extra add-on services, but it helps to provide the value, that's the edge that'll help you win. And you may not get the man hours that you got on this project 5 years ago. Because it's faster and easier and you're using AI to complete it, but you're getting the project, right? And that means you're going to have to sell more of other things and other things around it. It is a complicated thing to do. I feel for the gentleman asking the question. It can be challenging.
Yeah, it is hard because it's like upending their whole business model, right? So you have to then look beyond the horizon and go like, okay, but how does that impact the market, or what else is like important to the customer where you can then shine, right?
We could do a whole nother podcast on how AI is changing the consulting business itself, right?
Yeah. Wait, do you want to give us a glimpse?
Well, I just think that all the proposals that take forever to write, all the complexity that you require, entry level people to push down those man hours to lower cost people in various places can be replaced and is getting replaced with generative AI and a quick review. So a lot of the stuff, the documents, the PowerPoints, all these things that consultants are well known for are being built faster and through automation. And so that's a glimpse. I think it's going to change the field quite a bit. But I'm starting to hear those rumblings already.
That's so fascinating. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely something for another show, because we are hitting up on time, and I want to be mindful of your time and everybody who's watching today. If you had to give like one key takeaway to our audience when it comes to GSI partnerships, what would that be?
Oh, I mean, it is really about building trust and relationships. I think that's the critical thing. We think a lot about AI and technology and software as a service, but at the end of the day, this is a really human endeavor. And so building that trust with people, I think, is the most critical thing. Really being there. Yeah.
So true. Yeah, that's a key ingredient to all partnerships.
Yeah, I think that's right. This is a lot of fun, man. Really appreciate it, Franz.
Yeah, likewise. And I really appreciate everybody who joined us live today. We have Andrew, we have Jonathan, we have Peter, who joined us live from LA. You could have been anywhere. Marian in Sydney, Australia. I really appreciate you joining us live. I had a short gap, we didn't do any sessions in May and April, but we are going to be back now again regularly with the partnership. So the next session is scheduled for 2 weeks from now on the 29th. And I'm incredibly excited to see you all again then.
Great.
Thanks a lot for joining us, Joe.
Thank you.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Hark now, mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm, so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through wearable seats to boxes flow. Dar or die. Hoist the sail.